I think that, in my opinion, it comes down to what side of human nature are we fostering and feeding, right? Are we fostering the egalitarian, conscious part of us that is trying to advance toward a better collaborative future? Or are we fulfilling a more egocentric, reptilian sort of might makes right process, which, in terms of what we've seen historically, might makes right has often interrupted and destroyed a lot of egalitarianism because, and it's very akin to the labor movement, right? If we're trying to organize against a top down, what I say goes multinational corporation, they are able to just crush us unilaterally because there's no democracy. If we are trying to build something that works for all people, then we can't just use the business playbook. We have to do something and be bold enough to create something egalitarian. So I think that further, I look at a society that does three things. I think we have to be transparent and honest about our past, and that means truly reckoning with history. The backlash that critical race theory has received is because I think specifically white people and men and people who've dominated society through the might makes right lens are not willing to be conscious and possess that sort of humility and honesty around what the true nature and history of the past has been. And, with apartheid, as John sort of alluded to, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is the thing that allowed everyone to go, look, we have an honest conversation about the terrible atrocities that were committed for, the past 40 plus years in South Africa. And we have to truly build something to mend our society or else it'll all fall apart. And I think it's something that the first part of Reconstruction tried to do, and then we never finished it. We never actually went as far as we should have gone. And then the backlash of Jim Crow and other segregation measures put us back to where we were. And then once the Civil Rights Act got passed, we saw another pushback towards mass incarceration, toward the war on drugs. And so this push and pull between egalitarianism and, self-interest always comes to a head. And I think America perfectly encapsulates that because we are the land of the free. We're all about liberty and, capitalist interests first, profits, my well-being over those of others. And I think that we have to reject that. And in the present, we have to be, what did I write down? I think we have to have recognition and focus on restoration. So we have to restore the harm that was caused. And in order to move forward, we have to create a society that's focused around community, egalitarianism, and democracy, meaning that no one group of people has more say or power over the others. But we have to focus on the past before we can get to the present. We have to focus on the present before we can move forward in the future. And right now we're denying our past. So where my day-to-day feelings on this question fall tend to be like, did I wake up and read Twitter? Okay, I'm a little less positive. Did I wake up and have a great conversation like this one? Okay, I'm feeling a little more optimistic. I think we can make the change. And that's why I believe in radical optimism. Mm-hmm. Whether or not we will depends on our ability to work together. And that's where communication comes in. So that's kind of where, and that's where John and I talk a lot about this. Of you saw so much in the 60s and 70s. We're dealing with a lot of the same problems, even more exacerbated now, because those problems still persisted. How did that happen, and what can we learn from that? And so I always love talking to John about it, but I hope that answers it well.
No, it does. It does. And I'll say this, like, I agree with you both in that, and this is ancient wisdom to some extent, right? There's two parts to us. There's that self-serving, like me part, and then there's that other part that can think bigger than that. And even in the way you explain the brains, right? The reptilian brain versus the more conscious brain. I do think there's somewhat of a metaphorical, but also a literal, like, evolution that we are going through as humans, that we've gone through from the beginning of time, of trying to get to a steady state that actually works in a way in which you both are explaining it. What I often think about is, and even in the example you gave, John, of the picket lines, like, if at our core, and here let me put forth an assumption or a theory. At our core, we as humans are inherently selfish. And I mean that word quite literally, in that when we make a decision to do something, I think, right, and feel free to disagree, every decision, every thought we have runs through this calculation to say, does it benefit me in some way? Now, it doesn't have to be hedonistic. It doesn't have to be like, does it make me feel good in this moment? It could be doing something nice for somebody else because I want to be viewed as a good person. But at the end of it, almost like by definition, we only do things that are good for us. How we think about what's good for us, the time horizon, all those parameters are different. But at our very core, there's a selfishness there. There's our own interest at heart. And that's what's so interesting to me, because if we're going to get to that egalitarian state that you speak of, if we're going to get to that better place, we almost need people at scale to go against that human condition, which is to just worry about me, my tribe, my family, and to actually worry about everybody the same. And that seems like a Herculean task to overcome. So I'll open this up to you guys wherever you want to take it, but I'll frame the question this way, at least on paper, and I have no reason to believe it's not true. I ask it just because I don't know you that well, but you two are examples of people who are doing that, who are going against that selfish interest and saying, I want the world to be better. Even if I'm not better off, I'm willing to sacrifice to make the world better. How? How are you guys able to do that? Right. And I ask that quite literally because for so many people, they might aspire to do that. They might tell themselves they're doing that, but they're not really. And that leads to the problems we have. What do you think has allowed you guys, if it's true, to actually be able to overcome that and say, I want to do what's best for all?
Not an easy question to answer. I think that it takes me back to when I was first diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2004 and delivered a death sentence by the surgeon. The surgeon directly traced my illness to exposure in the factory to trichloroethylene, which they used to have us going down in pits to like clean out. And I look over and there's a 100-gallon barrel with skull and crossbones on it. And I said, where's my respirator? Where's my protective clothing? We don't have it. We don't provide that. And the same in the auto plant. They were using trichloroethylene to wipe down the car bodies right where I was stationed as chief steward. So they told us, oh, just wash your hands off of that if they're greasy. Yeah, they were using, they had instructed us to use trichloroethylene to wipe down the car bodies that had grease on them. And we, at that time, protested it and said there's replacement chemicals, but they didn't want to spend the money. So anyways, when I got pancreatic cancer and it was clear that that's where it had derived, according to the surgeon, my kids were really upset and they kept saying, well, Dad, why didn't you become a professional and, take a job like everybody else's parents, that's safe and clean and you wear clean clothes to work? And I said, that's when I decided I had to write the book because they were too young to understand it, but I wanted them in the future. And if I had grandchildren or if I didn't live to see grandchildren, for them in the future to understand that there are times when you can make a decision. I'm willing to expose myself to dangerous conditions for the better good of the people who are in that union, who are in that class of people who have no choice to work in those factories. It's not like they could decide, I'm going to become a professional. No, that isn't part of their family history or what they can afford. So I started writing the book, Fighting Times, and I lived longer and longer, and I finished it. And my kids, are still here, and they understand better what I tried to do, and they've taken on a lot of those same values. So, I think that you can decide that there are things more important than just your own self or your own monetary state. And that's an important lesson